So I think we're in the last stages of preparations. We've seen the preparatory fires to soften up the targets, take out some leadership. We've seen some small incursions, probably by special operations forces, to try to find the best route for the main body to get in, and potentially to try to get information on where the hostages could be. And now we're going to see a giant movement of all these tanks and armored personnel carriers and combat engineer vehicles. They're going to leave the assembly area. They're going to get in their attack formations, and then likely enter from Erez up at the top, because that's the best when it comes to terrain for all these formations to get into, and then funnel in to the top, going straight toward Gaza City. And to your point, they're going big, and it's going to be violent. They'll probably have some come in from the sea to create a dilemma from Hamas, maybe some coming from the air to try to drop behind them in central Gaza, to try to create a dilemma and envelop them. But once they get into the actual fighting, it's going to be block by block. I'm hearing the Israeli planners that talk to me talk about upper and lower Gaza. Upper being buildings and everything that you see normally in a city. Lower is all these tunnels. There's around 300 miles of tunnels down there. And that's going to be bare militarily to try to conquer.
How deep are the tunnels? Why can't a couple of questions I've had, and maybe you can help, Mick. How do they block the sea border? I mean, why wouldn't people in Gaza be able to get out on boats or, even swimming, as rudimentary as it sounds, right? They're on the sea. How do they block that?
So there's been a naval blockade in place by the Israelis for some time, because that was one of the means of which Iran, quite frankly, smuggled weapons into Gaza. The other was through the tunnels leading into Egypt. So that's been blocked. If boats were allowed in, there could be some exfils, civilians leaving that way. But I don't think the Israelis are letting any vessels in any of the sea space right off the coast of Gaza. I do think they'll try some kind of amphibious landing, maybe just a small special operations type force, or more like a giant or a large marine formation, like the Marine Corps type formation hitting the beach. Everybody is going south via vehicle or foot.
I also wonder, we talk about the objective for Israel, but going back to the terrorist attacks that we saw last week, why did Hamas do that, other than, spreading terror and, I guess, retaliation against what they feel has been done to them? Do you think they're trying to bait the Israelis into Gaza?
Yes, and that's a good point of your question. So when they attacked Israel like this, they had to know that this was going to happen, and I think they did. Why did they do it? Obviously, to your point, terror. They're a terrorist organization, been designated as such since 1997. But also, they want to disrupt all of the diplomatic efforts in the region. We've already had the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia and Israel were getting close to normalizing relations. This is not good for Hamas. It's not good for Iran. And if it's not good for Iran, it's not good for Hamas or Hezbollah. And that's potentially part of what you're trying to do. And then the last part, militarily, is to get them into a fight like this, because the IDF is one of the most advanced militaries in the world. But urban fighting, tunneled fighting, subterranean fighting, it takes away a lot of those advantages. And they have this place wired literally to fight the benefit on their side. So that is why they want the IDF to get into this battle inside Gaza City, for example.
Hey, Mick, I mean, do you think the IDF has been able to identify over the years who actually is in Hamas? I mean, the leadership is one thing, but of the 1,500 or so Hamas terrorists that came across the border, does Israel know who they are? Did they know really? Can they really neutralize Hamas as a terrorist organization?
So there's going to be a lot of the Hamas fighters are going to fight, so they're going to die, okay. And that's going to be, then they're going to gather all those, and then the ones that they capture, they're going to go through every camera. And of course, Israel, like most modern countries, has cameras everywhere, and try to make sure that they've identified everybody, either dead or alive, that took part of that operation. And they also keep detailed records on who they believe is in Hamas and their leader. Sinwar is in Gaza City He is one of the most significant leaders in Hamas. He's going to be target number one, and they've already taken about 12 of the senior leaders around him out so far, just since the preparatory fires started.
And Mick, one of the questions I ask kind of consistently to guests on this topic is, how much collateral damage do you think Israel is willing to inflict in order to achieve their military objectives?
Well, I would hope, and I do believe they will, adhere to the law of armed conflict, which is to do everything you can to limit civilian casualties. And the first step is getting this humanitarian corridor that allows civilians to leave northern Gaza and move to southern Gaza, hopefully in a UN-sponsored safe haven that's monitored. There's plenty of effort underway to set that up. But I do think Israel, the IDF, will do everything they can to limit civilian casualty. That said, this is urban fighting with armored personnel carrier, multi-dimension. There's no doubt that Hamas is going to hide behind civilians. There's no doubt they have buildings wired and tunnels wired. So there's going to be a lot of civilian casualties, which is why I think there's been so much effort recently to get as many civilians as possible. And I think last I heard was 500,000 have left northern Gaza. Everybody that can leave should leave.
Last week was much harder for me than I expected mentally. And I don't even have a dog in this fight. It just hurt to see all of the damage inflicted by the terrorist attack first, and then looking at the pictures of women and children in Gaza in the hospitals was also, the little girls look like my little girl. How do you deal with this as a soldier, as a leader? How do you deal with that part of it?
So that's the part I think that's the most lingering and the stuff that causes, quite frankly, veterans the most grief, along with losing their friends for the longest period of time. You'd hope that if, quite frankly, if adult men would start wars, they should be the ones fighting it, right? Not little kids as we see around the world in so many places, and certainly not all these innocent civilians who just happen to be caught in the crossfire. As you said, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Gaza, or whether it's in Ukraine. It's just unacceptable. It's why most of the UN protocols came after World War II, is to try to prevent civilian casualties like this. They just should not be part of anybody's combat operations and their plans. They should be completely excluded. Unfortunately, it looked like Hamas's sole purpose, quite frankly, was to kill civilians when they went into Israel. They actually bypassed many of the IDF's areas. Now we need to try to do everything we can to save civilians in Gaza.